If you live in the United States, Europe, Asia, Australia, New Zealand, or any country in the world, it would be proper if you know the version of Colombians who oppose and of course have a different interpretation of the government of Gustavo Petro. We just want you to know our perspective of the political, economic, social reality in Colombia, and also about the armed conflict and the peace process you may have heard so much these days. Colombia has been governed for decades by political houses and regional powers that dominates the electoral mechanism throughout the country territory based on power interests and contracting of clans. Clans are electoral companies in the municipalities, districts, departments, and regions of Colombia, at least 50 clans throughout the country. They control significant percentage of bureaucracy, jobs, hiring, and the market. Colombia doesn't have a social economical development based in capitalism. Just like many Latin American countries, in Colombia, state mercantilism prevails. Economic development depends on political power relationships. Now, if is it possible to set up a store or a business in Colombia and thrive without the mediation of politicians? Of course. People integrated into the state mercantilism inevitably generates a residual cash flow, around which can be woven commercial and business nets. Certainly, but let's say it. It's rare for this business to achieve significant growth without the participation of political power. These clans are affiliated with different political parties, and together they control the power of Colombia. Amidst the fragmentation of clans, they vie for the dominance of municipalities and regions of the country. Sometimes, when certain clan wins the electoral bid against another clan, all the people who depended of the defeated clan gets excluded from the economic life of that municipality for the entire period that the winning clan governs. That's how it works in Colombia. Not everyone has really a free vote. A lot of people vote according to clan loyalties in exchange for money or scrums. Each clan provides to the political parties an electoral margin, basically by throwing peanuts. That is the main reason why territories do not develop in Colombia. If you travel through the country, you will see the impressive lag in infrastructure of roads, ports, airports, railways, transportation system, or telecommunication. It's also regrettable the access to quality goods and service that provide welfare to the people. Colombia is a country that lives in precariousness, in subsistence, in making ends meet, immersed in deep poverty. Most important for state mercantilism is to maintain the scheme of dependence of people around the clans, and of course, retain their perks and contractors. Election after election after election. It's no use for state mercantilism. A citizen with productive capacities, autonomy to access goods and service, nor much less with economic freedom. A robust infrastructure of roads, railroads, ports, telecommunication, etc. It would only contribute to economic development to make things easier for people so they can connect with their dreams, resume life projects, set goals, since they would see them as achievable purpose, just like in a socio-economical development model based in liberty and capitalism. It's not the case, basically because this path does not serve the Colombian clans. Obviously, it would break the dependence of people on clans, so they would lose control over the elections and collapse all the business on which it's founded, the state mercantilism. Broadly speaking, that's how Colombia works and has always worked. Only 10 million Colombians have a formal job, of which no more than 1.5 million earn a decent salary. The rest earn a minimum wage or a little more than a minimum wage, which keeps them on the edge of life, just getting to the end of the month. But well, They have a job with their benefits, but the rest, more than 40 million Colombians live in precarious jobs, informality, poverty, or misery. 40 million Colombians. So, in that sea of millions and millions of people living precariously, powerful mafias do their thing. They settle in to operate and subdue rural communities according to their criminal interests. Colombia is a breeding ground for chaos, destabilization, and violent social confrontation. So at the beginning of this video, I told you that clans align themselves with different political parties. This part I'm about to tell you is very important for you to understand a lot of things about Colombia. These parties affiliate with clans or associate with them to garner the necessary votes that allow them to secure positions in the Congress of the Republic. Congressmen. So clans go ahead and raise votes because that's what they best do in the territory. Those votes are for congressmen. At the end, they know how to use those votes in behalf of the governance of the president. For a president to achieve broad governance, he reaches agreements with the congressmen who approve the president projects, and of course, these approvals are subject to political transactions, which boil down to controlling well-funded, bureaucratic, and contracting strongholds. In other words, money, budgets. Congressman, of course, ensures that these benefits trickle down to the clans, thus guaranteeing the entire system. And here's the crux. In Colombia, charismatic leadership can emerge with a nationally appealing and popular value proposition that puts him in the presidency. The arrangement that presidential candidate has to make may be confined to political parties, meaning congressmen and major contractors, without necessarily entangling themselves with regional clans or regional contractors. Clans don't waste their minds in the political or economic model of the next president. What the clans do care about, it's what congressmen negotiate. Of course, so the clans move all their regional electoral capacity exclusively throughout agreements with congressmen and the parties to grease their territorial influence. But wait a minute. The clans, congressmen, and parties are not stupid. They are well aware that at any moment a president may disregard the agreements with the parties and suffocate the clans. There is something more dangerous than this state mercantilism system controlled by an atomization of clans competing against each other. What's even more dangerous is that a single clan takes control of the presidency and eliminates all other clans and establish a totalitarian system of absolute state control. Not state mercantilism, no, but absolute state. Not with several parties with diverging interests, but a single party imposing unanimity. In other words, it's the radicalization of state mercantilism and the establishment of an autocracy based on state power and the dependence of the electoral base, now directly on the central state. An even more dangerous scenario. Anticipating this terrifying situation, well, the political class, even the clans, established a constitutional order and an institutional structure of checks and balance. Separation of powers, independent justice, control entities typical of a modern democracy. Very alike as you see in other countries. In this case, basically to prevent the rise of a tyrant with the ability to use all the flaws, the gaps, and the vices of the state mercantilism system and establish an absolutist state that would whip everything away. Well, let me tell you, that moment has arrived in Colombia. Gustavo Petro very cleverly exacerbated the frustrations of a mass of citizens filled with pain from generations and generations of precarious lives and promoted a solid populism of victimization in exchange for them to identify with his project. And so they did. 2. He allied with clans and parties with bureaucratic agreements, share-outs, and shady shields in exchange for regional votes. 3. He allied with the most sinister criminal organizations and mafias, offering them impunity and political play in exchange for money. 4. He allied with financial speculation elites, offering them dogmatic confrontation and chaos that allows them to predict markets and make money, a lot of money, in exchange for a small share of that money and, of course, use that chaos in behalf of his political project. And yes, he won the presidency. Petro belonged to the M19. He participated in, or at least endorsed, acts of terrorism for which he had undergo an amnesty process without publicly apologizing, without telling the truth about his crimes, and without repairing any victim. He has even defended or tried to vindicate the criminal group he belonged to. No, he has no regrets. He has never given up on the pursuing of his goals since the 80s. His causes and mission remain intact. And what are those causes? Those determined in the Sao Paulo Forum in 1990 and established operationally for Colombia in 1993 during the 8th FARC conference, when this criminal group, in line with the forum's purpose, they proposed to initiate a mass work at the rural and urban levels. Politically, they aimed to a transition from purely territorial to the ideological and political sphere under Mao doctrine regarding the combination of all forms of fighting and prolonged popular war for seize of power. Ideas they still hold. Petro's mission, in coordination with the worst oppressive dictatorships in Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, under the guiding criteria of Russia and China, and with the logistical and tactical support of FARC, ELN, and other criminal organizations that can subjugate the communities of Colombia under their yoke, replacing the clans and the military forces, of course. They have managed to launch a plan for the destabilization of Colombia. This plan, of course, requires undermining and destroy the institutional framework and constitutional order of Colombia to dismantle all the checks and balances that prevent that plan. Even though there are still many Colombians who can't see it, they don't connect the dots. Anyway, they are dismantling the operational capacity of the military and police forces of Colombia. They are recruiting an army of 100,000 criminals financed by the state itself to ensure intimidating operations at the urban level. They are pardoning all crime of mafias and guerrillas to legalize all criminal structures at the service of the regime, with the main mission of subjugating communities in territories, displacing oil and mining operations, expanding the jurisdiction of the drug trade. By the way, they seek to legalize without hesitation for better financing of the regime. And of course, they have started to undermine the National Prosecutor's Office and the courts with a barrage of discredit and replacement of institutional actors, this time in the service of the regime. It is worth mentioning that his own son, the president's son, confessed they received money from the mafias. That's why very delicate investigations have been opened by the prosecutor's office. Coca crops have increased by at least 50% in a year and a half. We went from 200,000 hectares to 300,000. ELN is a terrorist group trained and activated by the Castros in Cuba, a breed of traffickers, extortionists, kidnappers, assassins, and thugs who have always terrorized Colombia for 60 years. With these crooks, the current president is working on a new constitutional order tailored to the project they are about to establish in Colombia. That is, they are trying to change the constitutional order in the name of peace, willing to establish a statist and criminal enclave at the service of global tyrannies. Regarding the clan system and the state mercantilism, of course I agree, it must be stifled, but not to impose an absolute status of autocracy in alliance with criminals that destroy the institutional framework of check and balance, but to make way for a new socio-economic development model based in liberty, without privilege or dependencies on political power. A new order that allows free development for business, community autonomies that open channels for growth without any kind of subjugation, security that guarantees the life of every citizen, strategic infrastructure that allow people to connect with their dreams, with their goals, a country with a solid and unbreakable democratic institutionality with relentless justice. A few dogmatic and radical defenders of Petro in their irrationality still say, getting rid of Petro to go back what we had before. Obviously not! Behind of the Pacto Histórico, Petro's political party, made up of organizations like the Communist Party of Colombia, the FARC Party, which is the worst criminal organization that has operated in Colombia, thousands of massacres and bombing, the most violent in the story of this country. Anyway, behind that statist political movement called Pacto Histórico, all the rest of the traditional parties must go out with them, which have only been dedicated to restrict freedoms and building a bureaucratic and prebendary state that excludes people from development. Neither absolute statism, like the one Petro is promoting, nor state mercantilism like the one the clans had us in the last 100 years. Liberty, guys, liberty. Colombia is increasingly convinced that liberty is the way. Many Colombians are indeed already understanding this logic. The majority of citizens repudiate the Colombian government, and there is a lot of fear in Colombia. That's why, no matter how much effort the president makes to call out the citizens to the streets, people don't come out. At least not the crowds of people, not the masses of kind, reasonable, and brainy people. The president, long time ago, lost the population of free citizens. He only can turn to state bureaucracy, the official payroll, students who think they owe him something, and of course, finance and agree with pressure groups like collectivist organizations, unions, hired violent people, messed up and doctrinal people who will go into a fight for any crumb they are given. Urban militia cells also arrive. It is very dangerous, and at the end, that is why the protests that Pacto Histórico calls are violent. They constrain, intimidate, threaten, destroy, because that is their tendency. That's about their nature. Petro always speaks with a kind of inverse intentionality, so when on February 8th he said that decent people would come out, how frightening! We knew the worst was coming. On February 8th, after the president called them out, violent people got out to the streets to block the exits and intimidate the magistrates of the Supreme Court of Justice, waving flags of terrorist organizations that had taken over those facilities in the past with a lot of killing, to remind us how lethal and bloody thirsty they can be. It's up to you if you want to believe what I've just told you or not. But what it is unforgivable is that even after watching this video and after listening to this version, in any case you decide to skip it and not bother to delve into the danger that this man constitutes. Well, now you know, because the world should know.